All right. Again, thank you everybody for being here today. We, of course, here at the Hunt Institute are definitely working in the service of promoting racial equity and justice within our education system. And so today's webinar is really focused on lessons from the Divine Nine, how Black Greek leadership impacts, how Black Greek life impacts leadership and education policy. To provide a little bit of a description of today's session and webinar, for the past century, the Black Greek organizations have created safe spaces for young Black adults to excel in college, help unite Black communities across the country with service, and have laid the foundation for Black people to connect with each other for professional opportunities. Due to the exclusionary practices of higher education, these organizations provided a space for Black students and allies to find support, belonging, and advocate for change on their campus. Through the cultivation of leadership skills within these organizations, many members of Black Greek-led organizations have gone on to leave positive, lasting marks in the field of education through shaping either policy or advocating for change. And so today's webinar will highlight members of these organizations who use their positions to touch on the field of education and change it for the better. So we appreciate you all being here today. Our webinar, Race and Ed webinar, is committed to having honest conversations about issues of race that are embedded in and impact all of education. So we really kind of wanted to touch on this today with our topic and kind of hit on some of these things that are important to us. Of course, we have Dr. Ashley Canty, who will be moderating this session. So I'm going to turn it over to her now. I believe she might not actually be back yet. So in the meantime, I'll actually have each of the panelists to introduce themselves, to tell us a little bit about what organizations they are members of, as well as the work that they currently do now. So we'll start with Adria.
Good afternoon. My name is Adria Merritt. I am currently the Director of Diversity, Opportunity, and Inclusion at the Virginia Department of Education. I'm also a proud member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. I look forward to our opportunity to chat this afternoon.
All right, and then we'll turn it over to Dr. Heath.
Good afternoon. Thank you guys for tuning in today. I'm a member of Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated. Currently, I'm the Assistant Vice Chancellor and Dean of Students at Fayetteville State University. I'm recently coming from North Carolina Central University, where I ran one of the nation's leading men's retention programs. Yeah.
And then we'll turn it over to Chris.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chris Ray. I am the founder and CEO of HBCU Internships Foundation, Inc., which is a nonprofit organization that we just founded last year, where we are building the largest database of internships in the world, specifically dedicated to HBCU students, and building a pipeline of Black leadership and opportunities for students into the workforce. The foundation focuses on not just providing the internship, but also getting the students to the internship and providing housing for them. I have the honor and the privilege to serve as the 36th International President of Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated.
Appreciate that. And so I will have Dr. Canty to also introduce herself as our moderator for the session, and then kick us off with some questions.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Dr. Ashley Canty, and I am the Director of Equity Initiatives at the Hunt Institute and also a proud member of Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated. So I'm very excited to be here today moderating this panel, speaking about the importance of Black Greek life. And also thank you to the Hunt staff, Letitia Brown and Jameson Lowry, who are also here providing support. So super excited to get started today with our panelists. So for over 100 years, historically, Black Greek-lettered organizations have long provided advocacy and support for Black communities. And so really excited to think about the ways that our panelists here are able to engage in their work around advocacy, but also how that relates to their membership in a historically Black fraternity or sorority. So thank you all for being here today. We will get started with Chris with the first question, and this will be answered by all of our panelists. Could you explain what inspired you to join your organization and how it has impacted your career path?
Thank you. Well, I attended undergrad at East Carolina University. I ran track. A lot of the guys on the track team were members of Phi Beta Sigma. I was always impressed with every track meet that we went to. These blue and white people kept on coming up to them. No matter where we were in the nation, there were always these blue and white folks that kept on coming up to the track guys, and I was just impressed by the brotherhood and the engagement that kept on happening. Decided to do my research at that time and realized that the impact that Phi Beta Sigma had in the nation based off of the members that came through the organization at that time, kind of fit my personality. And little did I know that getting involved with Phi Beta Sigma would put me on a path of service that continues, of course, to this day, not just serving the fraternity, but serving outside of the fraternity in spaces around community engagement. Had the opportunity to serve as just retired last year, 22 years from the United States Army in the National Guard with a combination of active and National Guard service. Had an opportunity to serve as mayor of Spring Lake, North Carolina. And so this whole theme of service has really been a big part coming from my engagement, being a member of Phi Beta Sigma, and how the fraternity helped to shape my thoughts on engaging the community and making my community better. And all of it just came from observing the camaraderie and brotherhood that the chapter was displayed, and the individuals that we kept on meeting along our journey at track meets.
Great, thank you so much. We'll go to Adria next.
So good afternoon. My name is Adria Merritt, and I actually grew up in a very rural community where school and other youth development programs were a central part of my life. So my mom and dad were very active leaders in youth programs like 4-H, and because of my parents, I always saw being active in community as just being an extension of your personal identity. My mom is also a member of Delta Sigma Theta, and my dad was a member of Omega Psi Phi. So I really saw that service up front growing up. I have fond memories of being a debutante in Delta Sigma Theta's cotillion in my area. I grew up not far from St. Paul's College. And the experience provided an opportunity just to further bonds I had with young ladies who I attended high school with, and with young ladies from my broader community. And so every experience that I had as a part of the cotillion really helped, or focusing on really projecting the best of who you were individually and collectively, focusing on academic excellence, self-esteem, etiquette, and preparation for college. And I just have fond memories of the women who guided us through the experience being warm, and they were leaders in my community. And so throughout school, many of the teachers were also Deltas, but of course, the most significant influence was my mom. And so her life as a testament of scholarship, service, and sisterhood really helped push me on that path. And when thinking about the personal connections and that central focus on collective action to serve and empower the community, I definitely knew that that was something I wanted to be a part of. And then when I think about my career in education, there were definitely many esteemed sorors who impacted and inspired me. I've always been one to really get into history and study history. So when I think about Mary McLeod Bethune, who pushed to upgrade libraries at historically Black institutions, and she firmly believed that libraries needed to be improved, which played a part in Delta's first national project. And I am a former English teacher and reading specialist and literacy coach, just really understanding the importance of having access to high quality text and how it can impact the trajectory of somebody's life. And of course, I also think about, was very influenced by Dorothy Height, who was actually born in Virginia, and she served as one of the national presidents of Delta Sigma Theta. And so as a leader in multiple organizations, she really harnessed that power of collective action and focused on what I feel like in my work I'm focusing on in terms of really building and wanting to do work to shape, to make sure that everybody across student groups has access to be college, career, and citizen ready. So when I think about the totality of that, from being a little girl in the rural community and seeing these change makers, and then growing up in my field and studying these educators, I think that that shaped me to know that that was the only path for me to take, especially when I thought about collective action.
Oh, I love that. My mom is also a member of Zeta, so that was definitely a significant part of why I joined. But all the things that you named, I really appreciate how intentional it was for you to kind of find that path in life. So thank you so much for being here. Next up, we will have Dr. Heath with the same question.
Well, for me, my journey is a little different. I'm first gen, so I didn't have any Omegas in my family. I had a distant cousin, this cousin that the family, but you really don't know him much. But throughout my high school career, playing middle school football and sports, all of the authority men that held me accountable was men of Omega Psi Phi. And so my head football coach, my middle school coach, one of my principals was a member of Omega Psi Phi. And when I would go in their office, I would always see that shield on the wall. Never knew what it meant, but something about it just intrigued me. And so I'm a big history buff. And when I found out that Carter G. Woodson was a member of Omega Psi Phi, I'm a historian of Black history, and just finding out what he brought to the table. And one thing I found out with Omega that really said, this is what I want to be, the brotherhood. The brotherhood is like no other. I had 8 members on my line, and we were tighter than ever. We attend parties together, birthday parties, our kids play together. And so it's just big on mentorship. And so when our fraternity was established, it was a professor that sat down with these young men and really wanted to bring this organization to light. And so I carry that torch with me, is that how do you give back to the younger generation, and how do you lead and mentor while holding Black males accountable at the same time? And so Omega, just something's in my heart. And I think that for us, we get a lot of slack, but deep down, when you see the work that's being handled behind the scenes, you'll see what this organization is really about. And so for me, I knew this is where I wanted to be. Something about that purple and gold, just seeing it, that royalty, it's just something that I love. And, I'm gonna wear this to the day I die and continue to do the work.
One thing I appreciate about all 3 of you is the connection to education that you all saw as a way into these organizations and a reason, but also highlighting the people that you saw that were members of this organization that encouraged you. And so it just really shows how important mentorship is, whether it's in our Black Greek lettered organizations or in education, and how that can really change, the experiences that people are having. So I really, that definitely resonates with me, and I'm happy to hear all of you speak of that as a reason why. So Chris, again, this next question is for you. So as the International President for Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated, you serve as a leader for over 650 different chapters and thousands of Sigma brothers. How does this role impact the work that you do within the education policy space?
Great question. First of all, I'm jet lagged because I just got back from visiting one of those chapters in South Korea 24 hours ago. And having the opportunity to visit one of our overseas chapters and having the discussion with them around how we as an organization can continue to engage them and elevate the resources that we provide as a national body. But education is a big piece for us and how we are trying to redefine in this role as international president, how we're trying to redefine access to affordable education for our members. And I'll give you a quick example. Just recently, about two and a half, maybe 3 weeks ago, I signed a MOU with National University, where we are now as an organization. National University is going to be the premier university for Phi Beta Sigma members who we know we have and all of our organizations have this, where individuals start off going to college, they join our fraternities and sororities, but sometimes life happens, right? And they end up not finishing their degree. And trying to navigate back to the initial institution that they were at has a lot of barriers for whatever reason. And so what we did was we recognized that being a challenge for some of our members, we decided that it was important to make sure that we have an institution that we partner with that can lower those barriers. And so if you're a member of Phi Beta Sigma, if you apply to National University, not only do you get discounts in tuition, but the majority of your credits could transfer over to this accredited university. I know, yeah, by the way, there is a discount that we provide also for the family members of that member of the organization, which is extraordinary. And so what the message that we're sending is that access to education, number one, is the key and will always be the key to moving from one economic rung to the other. The other piece of the message that we're trying to send to our members is that we are committed to access to affordable education at the collegiate level. And so, because we know that it was education that pulled a generation of people with our skin hue into the next economic rung, right? And we have to continuously find opportunities in that regard, but that is all centered around the economic opportunities is centered around the educational pursuits that's necessary and the doors that can be opened. And so again, as president, I knew that I have a population of my members that life happened, and we have to create opportunities for them to get access to that economic rung to help to provide opportunities for their family. And then the only way to do that is to create a pathway, an educational pathway. And so in my short time as being president, I will tell you that that is probably one of the greatest achievements thus far for us, is identifying the building on this new opportunity and creating a pathway for our members and their families.
Thank you for that. The focus on that economic and social mobility is so important as we think about the origins of our organizations and we think about HBCUs, especially for Black students and Black families. The social mobility provided is so important in being able to navigate systems and structures that sometimes create barriers for us to be able to provide and to gain the education that we hope to have. Our next question is for Adria. Thank you again for being here today. You mentioned some of your network and how that's impacted your membership, but also your career. Could you talk a little bit about how the extensive network of your organization has helped to inform your service to the state of Virginia?
So I think what's really important is when you think about the structure of fraternities and sororities, I want to say that they are really rich, and I'm going to say the word rich with people power, rich with successful programming, and rich with partnerships. And when I think about the work that I'm doing right now, specifically with cultural competency, there are 4 domains in the framework that we have in Virginia that is really working to deliberately address academic gaps and really have a focused pathway for how we can work on making sure there's equitable access for all of our communities. And so the 4th domain of that, I'm gonna name all 4 first. You've got self-reflection, you have pedagogy and practice, you have learning environments, and you have community engagement. So that community engagement piece, that 4th domain, really does have that opportunity when we think about the rich networks that sororities and fraternities provide, because it really does provide that opportunity to push in, to amplify, and to support ways that we can enhance the quality of life for students. So the big question, though, when I think about community engagement and the work that I'm doing, since we know that all of the Divine Nine are values aligned, right, and empowering our communities through service, a question is, as I look at this work, how do we leverage this prosperity to support young people in schools and in out-of-school settings in a very strategic, cohesive way. And so when we think about what Delta Sigma Theta offers, we have a 5-point programmatic thrust. And one of those thrusts is educational development. And so it has established 3 programs that are throughout communities where there are Delta chapters. And Delta alone has more than 300,000 women who are part of our ranks. So these programs are the Dr. Betty Shabazz Delta Academy, Delta Gems, and Embody. And these structured programs provide school-age females and males ranging from age 11 to 18 with additional support addressing services that range from STEM education, self-efficacy, leadership, physical and mental health relationships, college readiness, fiscal management, coaching workshops, college and career prep programs, and even civic engagement and service learning. So when we think about this, it's that work that allows us to strategically collaborate and to support communities in that name of transformation. Right now, one of the things that we're looking at as a result of COVID and even prior to COVID is that our K-12 spaces are exploring ways to combat absenteeism and disengagement, loss in instructional time, which of course impacts reading and math growth, as well as mental health and well-being. And so with this network, we have structured curriculums and programming that really can enhance what students are getting in school and provide a more avenues or pathways for them to access this quality program that we know ends up shaping them towards college, even career, and how they see themselves as students. Another piece I think that's really important when we think about this framework for the work that we're doing in Virginia with cultural competency, and we look at that alignment with the work of sororities and fraternities, specifically Delta, we think about the fact that we know that it's important for students to have mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors so that they can imagine more. And so when you have these programs, they're able to have mirrors reflecting to themselves from all walks of life, where you can now imagine yourself as a doctor, imagine yourself as a lawyer, imagine yourself as an engineer through the work of sorors who are doing this work. In addition, you have other opportunities to see windows. You're able to look and connect with people who are not people from your immediate circle, so you can look out and see a different pathway or a different access point. And certainly sliding glass doors, as it's providing ways to slide across into something new. So again, the programming is extremely important because schools can't do it alone. Right. And when we really think about what I think Jeffrey Canada, I go back to him and what he did with Harlem Children's Zone and those wraparound services, and we know that we really need those right now. The work of fraternities and sororities are really poised through that programming and that network to really support and help us make those gains that we're talking about when we want to talk about using assets to leverage and help support our students.
Thank you for that. Just a reminder that our audience is able to submit questions or anything into the question and answer for our panelists. So our next question will be for Dr. Heath and for Adria. And you touched on this some, so we'll start with Dr. Heath and then we'll go back to Adria to answer this. How can Black Greek lettered organizations work together to advocate for equity? What are the key issues Black Greek lettered organizations should be focused on in the next 100 years of their existence?
Well, that's a great question. I think we all have this camaraderie when we want to make our organization look the best, be the best. And so when these organizations were started, they was put in these communities to uplift and build the community up. I think now that we're still doing that, but I think we're working in silos. So if we want to look at the next 100 years, I think we have to get back to community development and partnership. We have to get back to youth mentoring and revisiting the missions of our organizations. And the reason I say that, we had a national conclave in Charlotte, North Carolina, and they wrote a big article about how much money Omega Psi Phi brought into the city. And I was like, wow, that's a lot of money. But if you really look at it, who really won from us coming into the city? The hotels, the restaurants, the community really didn't see that money. So I talked to my line brothers who are one in finance, one is a pastor, a barber, one is in mental health, one is in education, and one is into insurance. And so we have all these pillars within our friendship that a lot of men don't have. So I have somebody that I can reach on and call and ask about finance. But I looked at it, I said, imagine as a fraternity, if we'd have found a single parent mother who's raising some young men, if we'd have went and said, you know what, we're going to put all this money into her, we're going to buy her house, have a ribbon cutting. You know what it would have done to those young men that saw 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 men of Omega standing in the front yard and giving their mama the keys to a brand new house. Visited to all the ethnic restaurants, the Black restaurants in the city. That's how we build and be community. I think for us, when we talk about politics, you have to look at it. Omega Psi Phi has a boys camp every year. It's funded by us, right? And this is an every year thing. Hundreds of boys come out. But if politicians look at the programs that are really doing the work and funnel that money through there, because two things are for sure. College may not be for everybody, but education is. And so everybody might not want to go to college, but if we get into these young men's life early, young ladies' life early, we can gauge them to figure out where they want to go. And I feel like when you looked at the greatest debate, W.E. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington, right? You have to look at your child and say, are you on the Du Bois track or are you the Booker T track? And Booker T was like, some students just need to go find them a trade and find out where they want to be. But we push a lot of kids to college. But if he wants to go to college, she wants to go to college, and they're on that track, that's where you send them. And eventually they'll figure it out. So if they on the Du Bois, the Booker T. Washington side, they'll say, you know, I got a trade, but now I think I want to get my degree. But we have to look at that totality and see what it is that most people don't want to hand out. They just want to hand up. And if we're going to be these Greek organizations, we got to go back to our community, to our foundations, and talk. Talk to our elders and find out what did you do during these times, because times are hard and they made a lot happen with a little, and we have a lot and we're not making a lot happen. So what we have to look about the mission, the youth mentoring, in the community development. I challenge all these Greek organizations to come together every year, find a different family, build something, start something, give a full ride to a rural kid that wants to get out of those cities. That's the power. And that's showing what we do as organizations to make this thing work. And so that's just my opinion on how we can really be in the trenches and start getting into the politics ourselves. But we call ourselves the talented 10th. I know that's a word that's not used much, but if we're this group of people that want to see movement, we have to move as an army and put I'm a part of this, you're a part of that. I mean, that's all fun, but the real work starts with us having action and making things happen. And so that's my opinion.
I totally echo the sentiment. I think the word that I want to lift up that you just said was silos, right? And so just how much more effective we are when we can come together as one. And that when we think about the rope with separate strands, but then we think about the power of that rope when it's together. So I guess my question for us to consider is, how do we strategically and visually, really visually, to collaborate to support community transformation? And I keep going back to schools because that's the realm where I work when I think about that K-12 space, right? So how do we have mutually beneficial partnerships with each other and even with other community partners that are focused on impact and those measurable outcomes that can be sustained and expanded? And when we're looking at those measurable outcomes, what are we doing then to amplify and to tell those stories so that it can be replicated intentionally when you look through that lens of, again, coming together to collaborate? And I want to go back, you mentioned tutors, mentors. When we think about student success coaches, post-secondary transition coaches. And I go back again to those wraparound services that we're able to provide in our network. So what could that model look like when we think about, like you mentioned, there's a summer camp, right, that Omega has, right? But when we're looking at, and some of the initiatives I'm thinking about with Delta, when we come together and really do a needs assessment with schools in our community to really strategic find out what do you need and what can we offer, right? And then really sit down as a cohesive unit in order to collaborate and provide those services and really amplify it. When we get the success and we get those metrics and we can measure it, to really amplify those stories so that we are seen as partners, that people know what we're able to provide, and we're seen as a cohesive unit in terms of advancing the outcomes for our communities and our students. So silos, breaking them down, I think is some of the power that we definitely have.
I want to add this last little piece. when we talk about, you said, what could we do? We got to create a village model, right? And
Mhm.
so when you take on that young lady, if her mother hasn't been to college, why not wrap your hands around that family and pass them along? And so I just spoke to our grand bosses about when a young man wants to join our organization and I write a reference letter, he now belongs to me for 4 years until he graduates. And so we meeting twice a month. You know, we're just seeing the data showing how this helps him get to the next level. I think we bring them in, but we got to mentor them all the way through this thing. And so they'll go back and get somebody else. And then that's how the train keeps going.
So that pipeline approach,
Yeah,
if
yeah,
you would.
yeah.
Exactly. Mhm.
I think it's great that you both mentioned the value of kind of building those relationships. There's a lot of organizations where there's a lot of alignment in what we're doing specifically in the Divine Nine. And so kind of growing our power in numbers by connecting with additional community organizations, many of which some of us hold dual membership, and being able to be a part of community orgs in our respective fraternities and sororities and just build.
Dr. Canty, you're on mute.
Yeah, can you hear me? Something happened. Keep going. I can.
Okay, sorry about that. Thank you. Yes, thank you both for your focus on community organizations and bringing those pieces together. That's so important to think about, like how we create opportunity and access and alleviate some of the barriers that our communities may face. This next question is for Chris and for Dr. Heath. So both of you have extensive work with HBCUs and NPHC leadership. However, historically, there's a lack of funding for HBCUs, which recently the Hunt Institute's higher ed team has written a few policy briefs on addressing it and naming it, and also providing some resources to learn more about that. What does a strategic partnership look like between HBCUs and their legislative officials, and what should each group seek to gain from such a relationship? We'll start with Chris.
So how should I say this? I think one of the keys to HBCUs, there's a strategy here, right? We have to elect more members to the legislature. Individuals who go to certain graduate institutions, who get elected to who gets elected to their state legislatures, by nature want to take care of their institution. That's just reality. We can flower it up and make it sound all kind of pretty like. Now, the right thing to do would be, as a legislator, is that you should look out for all the public institutions in your state. But the reality is that we know that the majority of those individuals who go to specific universities that dominate the legislature, the majority of the funding ends up going to those particular institutions. And so strategically, we have to look at making sure that we are, number one, electing more individuals from those specific institutions to get into the legislature, who would also then be in the room to be able to remind those legislators that, hey, this isn't happening and we need to do more. Or you get a greater number of individuals from those particular institutions that can amplify the voice. And so therefore being able to move more resources to the table. Now, it's going to take some time to get there. We have been slowly but surely building political power over the last century or so. But what we have to be able to do now is, as you engage, there has to be a commitment to engaging legislators. And you would be surprised how many HBCUs do not engage their legislators. They just don't. There may be the typical, I invite you to a luncheon or a dinner at the institution, but they're not really engaging that legislator for them to see not only the economic impact that this institution has in the community, but also the global impact that the institution is having, and why that legislator could be tied to the success of these individuals who are coming out from their particular district, right? And so it has to be it has to also be strategically not just the legislator that represents their district, but also those other legislators who are that has, whether there's a common interest or a or a level of strategic relationships that they can kind of build on. My particular HBCU may have a engineering background, but there may be multiple members of the legislature that are engineers, right? And so not only should I engage the legislator who is in my district, but I need to identify the other legislators who have a background that would be able to give them an interest into what our university is doing, which would then allow for them to become allies. Sometimes it's just being able to seek those individuals out. I'm not going to sit here and say that all members of the legislature are not willing to be an ally to our HBCUs, but I think that there has to be a greater effort that has to be put on there, while also leveraging the relationships of your more prominent individuals who have come through your university, right? So being able to use those individuals to do particular outreach to those legislators and be able to say, hey, we want to make sure that you remember us here. We want to make sure that we're leveraging those alumni that have come through, that are sitting in spaces of influence that could do that outreach, which will then pique the interest of that legislator and allow for them to make that engagement. So there's a lot of strategic ways that we can make this happen, but I will tell you the biggest piece of it is we need to elect more folks that come from our HBCUs that will be in the legislature. And then that's a whole nother conversation about supporting folks politically and understanding the importance of whether that's from a financial standpoint and what that looks like. And there needs to be a whole political strategy in that regard, but we'll save that for another webinar.
I also just want to plug, and that's a great point, thinking about how HBCUs engage legislators. At the Hunt Institute, we work with a collective of other organizations on what we call the NC10, which is the collection of our 10 HBCUs, 5 public, 5 private. And so our higher ed team, along with other teams across the Institute, have led this work and to engage HBCUs connecting with legislators, specifically here in North Carolina. And they were also able to support legislators in creating the first HBCU caucus in the country, and have also supported this work in Georgia. So as you're following along with HBCU work, Chris, you are absolutely right. HBCUs have to engage and do that work. However, I think you're right in terms of getting those people elected so there are voices and advocacy there. And so we're really excited for this work to grow and to continue to highlight how HBCUs and legislators across the country can engage. And to your point, you were right. There's also some barriers there in terms of access, but hopefully being able to support and see growth there. So Dr. Heath, you're up next. Same question.
Let's say, Brother Chris, you dropped the mic on that answer, but I'm gonna come from another approach from a historical standpoint. When you looked at the civil rights movement, it's called the children's movement. And if you ever visit the Greensburg Museum, you see how those children was leaving school, they packed out the jails, right? And so as older members in these Greek organizations and sororities, we have to go back and teach our youth how to collect data, how to put the politicians on Front Street with numbers and with data that shows what's needed. And I'll say this, it's kind of like when we had all these issues with police, it wasn't until cameras and people start showing the data and start running the numbers that these politicians had to sit down and say, hey, we got to look at these policies and procedures. And so for us as Greek organizations, we have to train the youth. And it really dawned on me. I met a lady, a member of Delta Sigma, she was 92, the most passionate lady I ever met in my life. When it's voting time, she was in her wheelchair. She would come to the university, pass out flyers, and she would get on the youth. And she said, the next generation belongs to you. You got to get out here with these politicians and you got to make your voice heard. She was 92 years old. And what she said, invite the politicians in rooms, sit down, like Brother Chris said, find that politician that went to a university. Let's pull him in a room. Let's tell him what the data is saying, and let's help him write some policies and procedures that's going to work for our community. I think that we have, like he said, we got to invite him in, and not just a speaking engagement. Like we need to really do a lock-in. This is a working session. We're going to be here from 8 to 5. We're going to come up with some tangible strategies to make sure that our voice is heard when these bills are being written. And also our chancellors of our university, they're our biggest, they're the head of this university. And so they have to make networking opportunities as well to get in these rooms and tell the stories of these HBCUs. And I think that's the power of that whole data collection. That's the power of the movement and showing the youth. Because now, if you talk to the average college student, they'll say, what am I voting for? Because they don't see the action. They don't see the imagery. And so we have to show them why it's important and how their word and their efforts and their footsteps and they're showing up and striking that box and voting for what they want to see. It has outcomes. And it's just not the president, it's local voting. And so we got to teach. And lastly, I'll say, I'm going to take another historical approach. When you seen the civil rights movement, before you can go out there and march or do anything, it was kind of like initiation. You had to go through training. You know, they would smash eggs on people's face just to make sure that you can go out here and know that when you go out here, these people that don't like you are going to do any and everything to harm you. And you have to be mentally strong to fight for what you believe in so that we can get things accomplished. Now, I know that was a hard faith for those individuals, and I would never want to see that again. But just think about the mindset you had to be in to train yourself to go out there and fight for policies and things that you believe in. And so for us, we got to get back to teaching and training. That's the whole key to this whole thing. The village model, the family model, each one teach one.
Can I just comment really quick? I know, just really quickly, I love that last statement you talked about, that training piece. You know, John Lewis, who was a huge personal mentor of mine, he talked about how at Fisk, how they trained in the basement with them slapping eggs in their face and them slapping each other and them literally doing things that they knew that they were going to encounter when they got there. You know, and again, we can have a lot of discussions around what is valuable to folks today. The reality is that, you know, there are laws now in place that, you know, we know that racism is not as overt as it used to be. It is a little bit more covert. And so therefore the engagement is totally different now. And just like they had their strategies in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, you know, we have to have a new era of strategies today because we know that it still exists. We know that there's a group of people that wake up in the morning and says that, you know what, I am better than you because of the color of my skin. And so therefore we have to be able, so I'm going to make sure that I create a barrier for you. And so we have to be able to know that that even though we all can now ride anywhere that we want to on the bus, we got to know that the bus company, that there are no executives that are at that level that look like us. And so the fight is different today. And so we as organizations, you know, recognize that, you know, from a policy and an economic standpoint, is truly where the fight is today. It's no longer and access in some arenas, you know, is still necessary. But the reality is that they know that they have to give us rights is not so. They have to give us rights in certain areas, like we can know, you know, we have to go in the back of the, you know, go in the back of the hotel now. You know, they got to sit us wherever we need to in the restaurants. But the reality is that when you peel back the layers, there are still so many barriers that are there. And so the strategies today, even though we have to get back to the level of training that they did back then, that training is different today on how we attack the issue because of the way that the barriers are now set up. And I hope I said that right, but
yeah.
Yes, it's definitely been a shift in the way that we approach some of the systemic barriers. And I think you're absolutely right. Like what is needed today to dismantle those systems is not what was needed 60 years ago, but being able to shift and stay relevant is so important, not only for communities, but also for our organizations and the work that we do. We have several questions from the audience, so we will move into those. This first question I will give to Adria as our DEI person on the call and member of Delta Sigma Theta. With so much research data showing that the future is queer, how are folks within this system, and I'm assuming that means fraternities and sororities, ensuring that the environment is safer for those who identify as LGBTQIA, especially in higher education, a space that is gendered and power is often placed with maleness?
So I feel like with the higher education, I'm going to have to toss it to either Chris or Dr. Heath, but I do want to kind of address that though still. I think the importance of development and training, I think that was lifted up. One of the things that Dr. Heath talked about is how taking that page from history in terms of training and opening perspective. Right. And so when we have deliberate efforts, deliberate modules, deliberate conversations in order to open up perspectives, I think that's one of the ways that it definitely works when you're talking about within sororities and fraternities themselves. I also want to take it, though, and leverage that and take it to the K-12 space in terms of the work that we're doing. Some words I want to lift up that I think came up in the conversation that we just had: policies and procedures. Was a word that came up. Outcomes is a word that came up. Looking at that village mentality and collective efficacy. So when we're also looking at policies and procedures and outcomes that have a deliberate lens or a deliberate focus on making sure that there's more access, more open, more availability to wider segments of our population, then you can measure that. You can monitor for that. You can have continuous improvement and adjust your strategies in order to make sure that you are being responsive to that. So that strategy approach, I think, is really, really big in terms of looking at how we make sure we're more inclusive. Now I'll throw it over for one of you guys to talk about the higher ed space.
Well, I'll say for me, transitioning to assistant vice chancellor, before that, I was definitely day-to-day programming and partnering with different departments on campus. And we would have a lot of focus groups centered around belonging, sense of belonging, sexuality and all this. But we have to remember, this generation has been the most inclusive generation there is to date. I'm an 80s baby, so it was different back then. But so what I've learned through these focus groups is that these students in college, they don't want to really focus on who you go to sleep with, who you go to bed with at night. They want to know about, can I belong? Can I be in your space and you not judge me? And they do a great job with it. I think for us as older adults, sometimes politicians don't listen and don't understand what these students of how they feel. They're not worried about belonging as much as we think they are. They're worried about the policies that keep them from belonging and how do they get around, like Chris said, these hurdles that come every day. And so I think higher ed is really moving in spaces for belonging. As you know, some universities are taking away the freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior year and calling it more first year, second year, third year, fourth year. And so a lot of more gender neutral restrooms are coming around on campus. With diversity inclusion training, first aid, what's it called? First aid. I can't think of the name of it, but so they're making all these trainings and transitions, even with pronouns, you know. So I think for us, we need to once again listen to the youth who are living in it, right? They're living it day to day, and we have to find space to learn from them. What I would do as a higher ed coordinator, educator, I would go to spaces where they are and just listen and not say anything and hear their conversation. And then I would program off the needs that they wanted. And that's how we had a good marriage, because I was giving them what I wanted. And then also I was getting what I wanted because I had the students come, I got the data, but they was intrigued because we were listening to what they wanted and how they felt as a college student.
Yeah, I think as we think about, belonging, I think that's really important. And someone mentioned some of the statistics specifically for Black trans community. I think specifically when we merge what's happening, especially like as fraternity and sorority members, a lot of the genderedness of our organizations can often be a barrier, and it's very nuanced and something that in national spaces, when I was involved as a fraternity sorority advisor and working for national headquarters, it's a conversation that needs to continue, but a conversation that has to be really intentional. To your point, Dr. Heath, to the lived experiences of these students. So how we talk about membership, how we engage our members, what happens at convention, being able to use pronouns, being able to talk about identity and what that means, and even beyond training, because as we know, a lot of times with training, those are great and they bring awareness, but they may not change the structures and systems in place that create barriers. But I do think you make a really great point, Dr. Heath, that we have to listen to the lived experiences of the students and really take that into consideration, because they know they will tell us exactly what it is that they need. It's if we are actually listening and doing the things that are needed to make sure that they have the resources so that people are very much safe in the places that we occupy. We have several questions. So I'm going to go through our attendee question, our panel or audience questions. We will not get through all of them, so we will do our best to make sure we touch some of the ones that we haven't gotten into. This next one's for Dr. Heath, because I know of the work that you did at North Carolina Central and the work you're doing at Fayetteville State, specific to the recruitment and retention of teachers of color. And at the Hunt Institute, we work with 7 other partners on something we call 1 million teachers of color, to add 1 million teachers and 30,000 leaders of color to the educator workforce over the next decade. So this is something that is very near and dear to our leadership's heart and to our staff's heart as we think about what this means. And Dr. Heath, I am aware of the work that you've done. I know that you could probably speak to this. So the audience member says, I've heard about the program to help folks finish their bachelor's degrees. What can you do to help increase the number of people of color, and in particular Black men, in K-12 education? Our babies can't be what they can't see.
Oh yeah, and I wholeheartedly understand that. The only Black male teacher that I had in my K-12 experience was a PE teacher, or when I played football, he was the weightlifting coach. Right? No, I'll take that back. One teacher, he was a social studies teacher. And I think that's why I really got into the politics side of history. But I'll say for me, when I started the Marathon Teaching Institute at Central, I say, you know what? These big companies, these big schools will go find our best and brightest athletes, right? I field our most bronze jocks. But on the flip side of that, it's some brothers that want to be in education. So what I'm going to do is build something for them. And so I would go out like a coach. I said, if Nick Saban can go recruit the baddest Black man that he think can get on the field and produce points, I said, I'm gonna go find the smartest, brightest young man across the world and bring him to North Carolina Central and provide funding for him to let him know that these students need you in this school. When I was in grad school, I was a reading coach. And so before the first 3 weeks, everybody in the school knew me. And I'm like, how do they know me? And the teacher said, look around. The only Black man they see works in the cafeteria, the janitorial guy, or the football coach. And I was like, wow. And so that's when I knew the impact of having a male in there. They loved me to death. A lot of them didn't know my name. I was like an exhibit. They go walking, pointing at me and stuff. So I was like, how do we do this? And so lastly, I'll say we met with Roy Cooper during COVID. And he said, what would it take to get more males in the classroom? I said, historically, if you look at it, if a man wants to be the head of his household and provide for his family, right? And he wants to have 3 and 4 kids, there's no way he can do that off of $35,000 a year. So what he's gonna do is say, I would love to be a teacher, but I can't afford to live the lifestyle that I want. But I told Roy Cooper is that if you raise that minimum teacher salary to $75,000, $80,000, you'll get more minority male teachers in there. And it's not about the money, it's about being able to live a lifestyle that you work hard for and be happy in your space. You never want to go home financially broke and try to come to school and perform to kids and you can't take care of your own family. That's a broke mentality teacher, and it's not going to last. And I think that's why education is suffering. You got highly involved educators. They're not reaping the benefits of what the skills that they bring to the table, but we'll pay an athlete $1 million a year just to be an athletic coach. It's not knock at football players or basketball players, but look at the autonomy of that. These people are leading the next generation. These students right here are playing sports. They're entertainment. And so that's why the Male Institute was started. And I think if we go back and recruit these males and highlight them as these high educational moving parts to education, like you are needed, we see you, come on Black man, be a teacher, you'll get more males into the system.
And Ashley, if I could just jump in, what does that also mean? I know a lot of school divisions are having programs like Grow Your Own, Educator Rising, right? Where they're looking at while you are a student, just like you had, say, FBLA organization. There are programs where they're trying to, from the beginning, really immerse you in it. And so again, as we go back to this notion of leveraging the resource rich, the people rich, when we think about our fraternities specifically, there are a lot of educators or people who have been teachers, principals, even retired within that space. So how do we look at even partnerships to bring them in to partner with some of these educator rising initiatives? So to the point, you can see someone who has done this and be able to leverage their experiences and their resources well, so that you have that as you're coming up through, and it's not an afterthought. You know all the way through about the pathways and what it takes and what some of those experiences are.
And we added mentoring, so we matched our young men with the male teacher, so they will follow them through 4 years as well. So that's a good point.
Yes, well, we have come to time. This has been such an amazing conversation, and I very much appreciate the three of you taking time out of your day and your schedule to share your wisdom with us. For those of you whose questions we didn't get to, my apologies. But our panelists are on social media. If you follow the Hunt Institute on Twitter, you'll be able to see where we've tagged them. Or if you follow the Hunt Institute on LinkedIn, you'll be able to find their professional profiles, where if you have additional questions, or even want to just see the work that they're doing, since they're doing such amazing work in the policy, education, and nonprofit space, feel free to connect with them. We're very fortunate to be able to have them as a part of our network. We have several webinars that are coming up as we think about the Hunt Institute and the work that we're doing. So please go to our website, follow our Twitter. We do a webinar each week, and it focuses across each of our content areas. So we have early learning, we have homeroom with our K-12 team, and our higher ed team has a post-secondary webinar series as well. So feel free to check those out, see my colleagues and what they're talking about, and also follow us on social media, as we often will tweet out resources, and we will talk about the work that we're doing, and also connect to the people and organizations that are doing work that aligns with our goals of educational equity. The Race and Ed series will be back next month. We'll have a webinar focused on women's leadership in education, philanthropy, and policy. So super excited to do that. In April, we will be talking with students of color in the arts. We'll be focusing on that. And then in May, we'll have one on Asian American history. So super excited for the next few months of our programming, and hope to see you all there. If there's anything we can ever do at the Hunt Institute, if there's any questions you have, don't hesitate to reach out to myself or any of the other Hunt staff. And with that, we hope you have a great rest of your Tuesday.